Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting of the Scrutiny Commission. As usual, this meeting is being broadcast live to the public, and for those not able to watch live, the webcast will be recorded and made available for viewing on the County Council's website after this meeting. We have had apologies from Mr. Pendleton, who is being substituted by Mr. Frisbee, Vice Chair of the Environment and Climate Change Scrutiny Committee, and from Mr. Richardson, who is being subbed by Mr. Champion, a member of the Adults and Communities Scrutiny Committee. Item 1. The first item is the minutes from the last meeting held on the 9th of November 2022, which are on pages 3 to 18 of the report. I move that these are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is that agreed? Okay, thank you. Item 2 is public question time. I've not received any questions from the public. Item 3 is questions asked by members under Standing Order number 7. I have not received any such questions. Item 4 is urgent items. We've received no urgent items. So item 5, next we have declarations of interest. I'm assuming that all members who are members of district councils will wish to declare an interest in relation to all the medium-term financial strategy items. Apart from that, do any members have any other interests they wish to declare? No? Okay. Item 6 is declaration of the party whip. Do any members wish to declare the party whip? No. Item 7 is petitions. I've not received any petitions. So we therefore move on to item 8, which is the first of our substantive items, which is the provisional medium-term financial strategy 2023 to 2024 to 2026, 2027. This starts on pages 19 of your agenda pack and runs through to page 94. Chris Tambini, the Director of Corporate Resources, will be introducing the item and is supported by Assistant Director Declan Keegan. The leader, Mr. Rushden, the lead member for Resources, Mr. Brecken, have also attending for this and the other MTFS items, and we have Mrs. Taylor, Deputy Leader, and the Chief Executive, Mr. Sinnott, as well. Okay, so if we can begin, Chris, do you want to make a start?
Yeah, if I make a pretty brief start, because I know Declan's going to take you through the report in a bit of detail. Just to remind members that when we were looking at this in late autumn, it did look really very tough. The Chancellor was talking about eye-watering cuts to the public sector. And I think for the first time since I've been Treasurer, first time in a decade, I think local government was actually one of the areas which fared fairly well in the autumn statement, and was one of the protected services along with kind of education and health. The word protected, I think you have to take with a little bit of a pinch of salt, because it still does look pretty tough over the next couple of years. I think all we can really look at is the next 2 years, because we've got a general election in 2 years' time, and I think the last 2 years of the MTFS are kind of post that election, and so it's difficult to predict exactly what it's going to be like. But I say the next 2 years do look tough. But having said that, they do look manageable at the same time. There's going to be significant savings we're going to need to make, but I think at a manageable level. That's all I was going to say by way of introduction, because I know that probably Lee and Nick want to say something as well.
Thank you, Chris. Does Mr. Ashton or Mr. Brecken want to come in at this point before we bring in members?
Well, obviously we're setting a balanced budget. It is difficult, despite what Chris says about getting some more money, because we've not only got the repercussions of COVID. We've got the repercussions of the war in Ukraine, and the vast increase in energy costs and shortages of staff where we need them. I mean, it's funny to say, but when we had austerity, it was actually okay. We knew we were going to get no more money, and we knew things were going to be tough. This type of came to us unforeseen, really. It's nearly a year since the invasion, and a year since we exited lockdown, and it has been particularly challenging and unpredictable. That is the main difficulty. We have as an administration stuck to our knitting and honoured the pledge to protect the vulnerable. So that comes with massive costs when you've got rising costs, particularly in Deborah's area, children. increasing costs in adults, with obviously nobody particularly, well, they're still spooked about going into old folks' homes. People want to stay at home, rightly so. I would if I was an old person. But it does cost more money to look after them. And then we've got the normal pressures from members that everybody wants their, potholes filling, and we've all got parish councils we go to. They don't particularly, or mine aren't particularly interested in the massive costs in Deborah's area in adults. They just still want their signs clean, their potholes filled, their hedges trimmed. We've got all those ongoing costs as we go along. We're disappointed in administration that fair funding appears to have been slightly longer grass than it was a year or so ago, which is difficult. We have now got a meeting confirmed with the Chancellor, thanks to the Members of Parliament, but it won't be until April, so it'll be after this budget. But in the spirit of making progress, I thank the Members of Parliament for arranging the meeting. It's something I certainly couldn't have arranged, and we are going down, I think it's April 26th, we're going down to see the Chancellor to tell him how poorly funded we are. And if you read some reports which Deborah and Lee and I read this weekend, the census on the changes in population are pretty shocking, really. If you look at, say, a borough in London, they've had probably a 20% reduction in people living there, and yet their FELS funding still remains the same. And yet areas like us, where we've had a 20% increase in people living here, we haven't had the commensurate increase in funding. So that exacerbates the unfair funding that we've got. And then, as Chris said, it's particularly difficult to do a 4-year MTFS. We've done one. There's some big numbers at the end, but it's very, very difficult when even my own government really only has a 2-year MTFS, because obviously we've got a general election in under 2 years. Having said that, I'll let Chris Declan run you through the numbers, and then Lee, as the finance guy, talk about them. Thanks,
Yeah, good morning, Chairman. The settlement we received was better than estimated, as Chris said at the time of the draft MTFS when we last came back to you. And whilst most of the additional money inevitably needs to go to reducing the deficit, I'm pleased that we have been able to find £1 million to lower the level of service reductions that we were looking at. I'm sure members will agree that having some flexibility will be welcome as we go through the various consultation processes. The budget deficit is larger than I'd like, and when we get to 25-26, but again, we've given ourselves the best possible chance of successes by planning ahead. The levels of savings are not what any of us want to see around the table, and I accept that, but it does allow the maximum level of resources to be directed to the services that our residents need. It is important to state that as an administration, we recognise that many residents will have a hard time with the cost of living increases, so we now need to repay them by continuing to deliver services efficiently and effectively, which is what we'll do. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Brecken. Declan, did you want to come in on paragraphs 23 to 40?
I think I was just going to do a quick overview of paragraphs 1 to 22 first, if that's okay. So the MTFS is broadly as it was when we sort of were released it for sort of draft consultation back in December, and sort of paragraph 6 just lay out some of the very high level assumptions. The main thing that's happened since then is obviously kind of confirmation of the settlement numbers themselves. It was described as a 2-year settlement, but the reality is it's really a 1-year settlement with just an indication of the year after what sort of the overall envelope is going to be. The main bit of interest probably to members, if you get into sort of paragraph 9, it gives you that sort of the main changes, like I say, primarily settlement versus the estimates we had to make in advance of that when we just got the sort of the November statement. And you'll see that grants are better than expected, although I would stress, there's it wasn't a sort of everything wasn't sort of coming in our direction. Daft things like social care grants didn't get inflation on. So obviously that's it means you just got less buying power than you sort of previously had. So that was a little bit of a hit. And we're still waiting for conditions on the grants as well. So there's still quite a bit of guesswork going on here. How much is going to be required to do things like support hospitals or move towards the adult social care reforms versus what can we use for sort of the local demand and kind of cost pressures. Still quite a bit of uncertainty going there. Other bit of information that came in was the council tax base information. We had the districts information showing not showing a material change overall, although there is a little bit of variation coming through across the district. But we did see through COVID that the council tax base is kind of pretty resilient, although depending on how bad the recession is, it could sort of change that. So we have left a recession kind of assumption in there for a couple of years' time. We're still waiting for quite a bit of specific grant information. We have had some come through, the main one being high needs, which is a couple of £1 million a year, better than we sort of initially forecast. So it's obviously really welcome, but it still does leave that sort of significant deficit. It doesn't really materially change the position that we're in on that at all. But we're still waiting for quite a few of the specific grants, public health being probably the biggest and sort of most sort of notable one, but there's quite a few out there that haven't come through yet. In terms of sort of I suppose the positive sort of news from the sort of settlement, the report does lay out as well where we've sort of allocated that to. Lee's mentioned the kind of £1 million that go to sort of reduce the level of sort of service reductions, sort of following various sort of consultation kind of activity that will sort of take place. We obviously haven't changed any of the savings at this point yet, so we're not sort of like, I suppose, getting ahead of ourselves, as it were. So it's just going to appear in sort of the final cabinet report as a single line kind of offset of savings. And obviously kind of the other money that we sort of put through, again, the table sort of does set out what we've done. We've tried to do it to sort of just keep to strengthen the sort of the robustness of the financial position. So £1 million on service growth. We're still seeing a lot of the transport pressures that we saw earlier in the year that's not tailing off. And the rest we've put sort of capital where it's more of a one-off nature and it helps to lessen the impact of the MMDR decision. And you'll see as well at the bottom of the table, the overall gap is a little bit lower. It's still at that concerning level. As Chris touched on, a couple of years looks manageable. A couple of years after that, you know, it does sort of fall off a little bit off the edge of a cliff where it's sort of the numbers are just much higher. So we've just got to keep that in our mind as we're sort of working through and sort of allocating resources. And obviously it does coincide with the fact that the settlement's only a 2-year settlement. So there's no new government information kind of coming in there on grants or anything like that. At this stage, we're not aware of any other changes that are going to be sort of required to the MTFS between sort of now and cabinet. Like I say, it may be grant information, whether it's conditions or amounts that could be the ones that come through. That's all I was going to say on paragraphs 1 to 22. I can take any kind of comments or questions.
Okay. So we're just following the consideration of the MTFS document, which hopefully all members have a copy of. Any comments on paragraphs 1 to 22 before Declan moves 23 to 40? Simon Golden.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just pick up on something Mr. Brecken said, that the service reductions have been lowered. Could we have a list of the ones that have been removed? It was a bit hard to track those through the scrutiny committee. So if you could, what does that compare to? Does that compare to when you published the budget before Christmas, or is that the kind of list that was floating around prior to the budget? It'd be helpful to understand that, please. I've got some technical questions on the inflation issues as well. Should I do that now, Chair? Or?
Yes, you can do. Yeah.
Yeah. So just looking at the paragraphs you just referred to, you've got some minuses on here. So what, if I'm understanding rightly, if you take the Market Sustainability and Improvement Fund, what you're saying there is that we got £4 million less than we expected to get. Or am I missing? Pardon? We got more than we thought. Okay, so all those minuses are in fact meaning that the amount we've got the deficit is less than we thought we'd got because we got a bit more. If you could clarify that. And then I think it was after Christmas, early in the year, the Chancellor announced in response to the crisis in the NHS that there was going to be some more money available. And I did hear him refer to some of that money was for social care. So I'm wondering where does that fit into that? Is that something we've not actually had a figure on yet, or is that all connected? Does that come under this description of this grant, Market Sustainability and Improvement? Thank you, Chair.
Do you want to take the first pass at those? So in terms of the service reductions, there hasn't been an allocation against the savings lines. So we've left the savings lines as they are, and there'll just be £1 million across the 4 years as an offset to those. So you'll see, bizarrely, kind of a positive saving, as it were. So as the different consultation processes go through, then Cabinet will have a decision later in the year about how they allocate that £1 million out. So that
just to clarify, of the proposed service reductions that have gone through the scrutiny process, none of those at this stage have been removed. So what you said before is not quite right. Then you said that I made a note. There were lower service reductions. So to my mind, they reflect the list that was published.
So the service reductions in the sort of savings appendix will stay the same as what went out in December for consultation. The thing that's changed is the £1 million to offset service reductions. It just hasn't been allocated on a line by line basis yet. So that was going to be run through the sort of we've obviously had some consultation on the budget and sort of some, I suppose, new information to sort of take into account. But as those consultation processes run over the next few months, then that £1 million can get allocated against specific lines.
So if members felt very strongly about some of the service reductions, or one or two, is there now scope to ask for that to be looked at again as part of the scrutiny process before we make a decision 4 weeks' time on the budget?
Yeah, that's part of the plan.
Okay, that's the bit I really wanted to understand. Thank you, Chair.
In terms of the other questions, negatives are good in that table, which I know is a little bit counterintuitive, but it's the way our minds seem to work in finance. So negatives are good, positives are bad. And then in terms of the post-Christmas health funding, I wasn't aware of anything new. The only funding where I suppose they set out the spending envelopes when they did the autumn statement back in November. So there's no new funding beyond that point, and we've received the level of grant coming through in social care. That's baked into the budget. We'd made an initial estimate before December. We've refined the estimate from what we've seen, and that's the big thing we're waiting for, is those grant conditions. How much is social care helping discharge versus how much is social care just, I suppose, coping with the sort of the pressures it's got sort of per se anyway. So we're not aware of any new bits, and everything we do know about is baked into those figures now.
Do any other members want to make any comments before we hand back to Declan then to go through paragraphs 23 to 4? Thanks.
Okay, I'll be really brief on these because, to be honest, nothing much news happened. So we've got no new information on inflation. So the inflation assumptions are staying as they are. And if you think about it, it's things like national living wage, which is already set for April. Pay negotiations have just started, so it is pretty much as it was. The only thing that we could have tweaked, but it doesn't look like there's enough information to, is the interest rate expectations are a little bit lower now. But to be honest, there's so much could change between sort of now and over the next few months. It wasn't worth changing. So, but everything else is pretty much per the draft budget.
Thank you, Declan. Does anyone have any comments on those paragraphs before we move on? No. Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just make a comment on some of these eye-watering figures then. So the contingency for inflation, living wage, contingency for so the living wage is 42 million, pay awards 34 million. I mean, they are just eye-watering figures. I don't understand how any government can think that can just be absorbed. Those kind of figures, they are directly attributable, as the leaders said, to circumstances outside our control, i.e. inflation, Ukraine, certain actions by previous prime ministers, dare I say. It's just incredible that has to be absorbed. I don't know if Nick's got a comment on that. I mean, no council, even if you were one of those rich ones, would be able to suddenly find 70, 80 million to cope with decisions that have been made. I mean, okay, the pay thing is negotiated nationally. In theory, we have an input into that, but it's imposed, isn't it, through the LGA? I just don't understand how we can be expected to just make those provisions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Mrs. Hack.
Thank you, Chair. One of the impacts on the MTFS recently is we set a balanced budget last year, and then inflation was more problematic than we thought it would be. How realistic are those figures that are in 33 and 34? And what's our level of tolerance for prospective inflation and what it actually could be? Because clearly we anticipated that inflation wouldn't be as high for so long. If that happens again, what's our balance of tolerance in the numbers?
Not a lot, to be honest. In some ways, I suppose it'd be a bit of deja vu if things stayed, at sort of the 10% level instead of sort of falling back as they're predicted. We'd be in that sort of same position where we're just going to have to find more savings. Our envelope is our envelope. I suppose the difference this time is, and you're absolutely right, when we sort of set our budget sort of 12 months ago, the peak was around about, I don't know, the 4 or 5% type level. It's now at the 10% level. Now, as everybody's been bitten by these assumptions across, all the sort of the financial economic commentators, they have made them more pessimistic. So the tilt does seem to be that, it's staying sort of higher for longer. So there's less chance that I suppose it could play against us. And similarly, national living wage has been set for next year. We've also made more pessimistic assumptions on the pay award. So I suppose the likelihood's gone down, but if it did sort of persist, we would be in that position of just having to find more savings.
Thank you. Anyone else have any other comments, questions on this item? Okay, so it brings us through to paragraphs 41 to 62, appendices C and D, the adequacy of earmarked, reserved and robustness of estimates. Declan again, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. The main bit of new information we've had is since December is the SIP for Resilience Index has been released, and that it's very backward looking. It covers, the latest release is 2021-22, so it sort of follows the kind of the statutory accounts. I mentioned just because I suppose it's just that useful comparison of where we are against the sector, and we're still performing better than average versus other county councils. Probably not as much as historically. If you track back, you can see as kind of as shifting from the sort of the predominantly low risk to sort of a bit more in the sort of the medium risk type side of things. But still kind of if you bear in mind our funding position, still a very good kind of outcome in that comparison to other county councils. Obviously, kind of the sector as a whole is kind of under a bit of pressure. We've also had a draft audit report for value for money, and they haven't, obviously it's still a draft, but they haven't arisen any new issues that we feel the need to sort of change the MTFS for. There's no real surprise in there. They raise the main concerns around SEND, but otherwise it's kind of nothing to influence the MTFS.
Thank you, Declan. Does anyone have any questions on this part of the report? Mrs. Hagg.
It was just a really quick one in terms of what it looks like and what it's been reported as. So the special educational needs, we're looking at £25 million worth of savings. It was indicated on the radio the other day from the service director that this wasn't a cut. So I didn't know whether or not, are we looking at cuts to the service? And how is that presented to the public? Because it seemed to be that it wasn't a cut. I just wanted that clarity. How is that going to be presented to us?
I think that the main kind of, sorry, do you want to?
I think it was misrepresented, to be honest. So that's the first point. It was very misrepresented. What it is we're spending £25 more than our allocated budget from government for high needs. So what we're doing with our TISL programme is not making cuts, we're doing transformation, which is how the service is delivered. So what our aim is to get our spending back within our budget. So it's not a cut, it's a transformation of getting our savings back within the budget. And just to clarify, because there's a lot of confusion out there, that you've been confused as well, that as the local council can't put additional funding into the high needs block. We're not allowed to do that under the law, under the rules. So we can't choose to spend that money. We have to get it within the spending block that we've had, which goes to the longer story of fair funding, etc. So it's not cuts, it's transformation and getting our spending back within the budget that we're allocated by government.
Only to summarise, Chairman, as you move on from this item. So, we say we've set a balanced budget, but it has been blooming difficult, really. I mean, Simon's highlighted, a pay award at 34 million, pension contributions 2 million, living wage 50 million, other running costs 20 million. Then we've got inflation at 10%. We've got problems with SEN, and we've got problems with SEN transport in particular. It's not something just to glibly say we've set a balanced budget. It has been very, very difficult to set a balanced budget. But we pride ourselves as an administration that we do set a balanced budget. We're never, ever going to be a Northamptonshire, but it is well worth recognising the work that has gone into achieve a balanced budget. When a lot of the things, even Simon said, they're beyond our control, but we just have to deal with them. There is nowhere else to go. So virtually all the increase in council tax will go for national living wage and pay awards. It's as simple as that. and there'll be probably a diminution in some of the services we provide. But if we don't with the balanced budget, we'll eventually go bankrupt. So we've got to do it.
Any other members have any comments on that? The report? No. Okay, so over to Declan for paragraph 63 to 95, appendices A, E and F, capital programme funding and affordability changes to the capital programme and the corporate asset investment fund.
Okay, again, there's not many changes to this section. I mentioned before the slight improvement to the funding where we had sort of some one-off money off the back of the settlement. So that's fed into there, but not a big change. So we're still forecasting a borrowing of £124 million, which is the headline. We'll probably, this is an area where we'll have a bit of a look at phasing between sort of now and cabinet, just to sort of make sure we're not declaring underspends or overspends that we don't need to. But that's more of moving things around years as instead of actually changing the schemes themselves.
Any member, Mrs. Hack?
Chair, I actually have a question on further paragraphs as well, if that's all right. Can we take it now, or this is the full section? This is up to just paragraph 95. I've got a question on 102. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay, just firstly on the Freeport. Obviously, the Freeport, there's the business rates are all tied within the Freeport. Have we done any calculations in terms of what that might cost us overall, in terms of businesses making the decision to be attracted by the Freeport and not basing themselves elsewhere in Leicestershire? But the question I had was on 102, which was around impact assessment, and we talk an awful lot about making sure that we protect the most vulnerable. However, in this paper, it indicates that we actually haven't been able to do that really. And we know that the impacts of the cuts so far has affected people who are most vulnerable. And expected to the given nature of the council, that's to be expected. It seems to me as if that's okay, but clearly it's not. So how will we protect the most vulnerable if we recognise that the service cuts impact the most vulnerable the most? And I'm not quite sure how we can square that circle, and I didn't know if there was any feedback on that in particular.
Chris, did you want to respond to?
Yeah, I start with the Freeport question. So in terms of the Freeport and business rates, for the local authorities that are affected, there's what's called no detriment, but in effect there's a bit of a clause there which will reimburse those authorities, districts and counties for any impact. So yeah, so there shouldn't be an impact. And the displacement thing, again, that there shouldn't be any displacement, particularly within Leicestershire to the Freeport area. So we won't be impacted by the Freeport in terms of our loss of business rates. Clearly it has a bigger impact on billing authorities than it does on the county council in any event. So I'm not anticipating that being an issue. It's been a bit of a battle getting that through government, but we have got there in the end. Just in terms of the equalities question, if I kind of kick off, I don't know whether others will want to come in. Clearly, this is more of a general comment in terms of the MTFS. When individual savings are going to be made, and there will be, particularly around the service reductions, there will be reports to Cabinet that kind of set out in detail what that saving might entail. And as part of the kind of whole consultation process, a more detailed EIA will be produced that will try and mitigate the impact of any service reduction in terms of those groups with protected characteristics. So this is kind of more of a general statement, but there is a lot of work that's done for the individual savings to try and mitigate the impact of service reductions. But clearly, it is difficult when you are providing services, as you say, to the most vulnerable in the county. So I'll say the detailed work will be done, and we will look to mitigate any impact.
Mr. Galton?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So just on the capital programme then, on these large projects, particularly the Melton Mowbray scheme and so on, and the grants, how does inflation get taken into account? Does that have to be found if the costs go up? The other funding sources that are coming into these big projects don't get uprated for inflation. Then no, we have that. So that's another thing. We've talked about things that just fall on. It's just expected at the local authority. defines that. There's no mechanism for going back.
Is a fixed sum, and that's one of the arguments we've had with them, that as you know, so it is very, very difficult. But Declan will tell you the truth, which I think I've already told, and Declan.
No, absolutely. Government grants, that it's just fixed at the point of kind of award. The only one that we do get a bit of inflation is this Section 106 money, but it's not always linked to kind of the costs, as the leaders just sort of pointed out. You know, it's not linked to sort of the cost necessarily that come through the construction industry, unless sometimes on a lagged basis. But yeah, it's another headache we've got.
Okay, and we're saying, and I know you've raised this before, we're saying that in relation to infrastructure needed to support new development and local plans, that really giving a warning there and saying that going forward, we're not going to be able to fund that. That is going to have to be directly funded from Section 106 and developer contributions. I understand you're saying that now in relation to local plans, but there are existing commitments and local plans that are delivering housing now. So I'm not thinking about the ones that are coming forward and being reviewed like Charnwood's is at the moment. There are already local plans delivering that will require to deliver so many houses a year to meet all the 5-year supply and require infrastructure. What are we saying about that infrastructure in existing plans where it requires, for example, in my division, if it ever comes forward, it requires a new primary school. The developers are already saying we're in negative viability. So go back to the district council, they want to negotiate a reduction in their contributions. And there'll be a bun fight about what will suffer from that. Will it be education? Will it be transport? So on and so forth. Very difficult discussions, but it's directly linked to this problem that you've just referred to, Leader, about costs going up, construction costs going up, inflation going up. So I understand what you're saying about giving that warning and forward planning for local plans, but we have now schemes coming forward in existing plans, or they're just planning applications that come forward that are going to require infrastructure.
Yeah. If I try and pick that up, it is a big issue. There's no doubt about it. I mean, our approach. I mean, the two key demands are on education and on transport. So our approach is going to have to be, we're going to have to focus on education, because you've got no choice. It's a statutory requirement. We've got to make sure there's adequate school places. So in terms of developer contributions, we'll be looking to get that into education. What that means is clearly transport schemes are going to suffer. I think you've probably heard me say over the last 5 years that we've probably got enough funding there for 2 local plans. And clearly we've had Melton, we've got the A511 in Northwest Leicestershire, and given the scale of the investment required in both of those from the County Council resources, clearly we haven't got the ability to fund any local plans to that extent. So what is going to suffer is going to be those big infrastructure, high-rise infrastructure projects that generally we've done kind of before the development comes on to enable the development to come on. That's now going to have to be, we're going to have to use the developer contributions to save up the money and then do the intervention after the event. So there will be an impact, because we can't afford to, in effect, borrow to do those big infrastructure projects. But we're going to have to do schools just because that's a statutory requirement to make sure there's school places.
Does anyone else have any comments, questions on item 8 on the agenda? No? Okay, so thank you for everybody for their comments and questions and responses on that. That now moves on to item 9, which is the medium-term financial strategy for the Chief Executive's Department. John Sinnott, the Chief Executive, is in attendance and is supported by Lauren Haslam, Director of Law and Governance. We also have Tom Purnell, the Assistant Chief Executive, Gary Connors, Head of Regulatory Services, here as well, and Sam Barrett, Finance Business Partner, is joining us online. Along with the leader, we are also joined by Mrs. Taylor, Lead Member for Regulatory Services, and Mrs. Posnett, Lead Member for Equalities and Communities. Mr. Payne, Lead Member for Waste and Minerals, has sent his apologies for today, but has confirmed he'll respond to any questions relevant to his portfolio, if needed, in writing after the meeting. Again, we'll be working through the report in stages in line with the schedule circulated, so on page 2 of that schedule. And if I hand over to Mr. Zinnett, if you want to introduce the item.
Thank you, Chairman. As I've said to the Commission previously, the department doesn't lend itself to an introduction for a report like this, given we are split into sections. So my suggestion is best to take questions as members wish on the different sections.
So does anyone want to ask any questions on that report at the moment, the Chief Executive's Department? No.
So, Chair, which area are you going to go through the different sections of it?
Paragraphs 1 to 14. So we start off with paragraphs 1 to 14 on the introduction, service transformation, overall budget, including transfers and adjustments. Anyone have any comments on that?
I'd like more about the proposed saving in planning, historic and natural environment.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Galton. Does anyone want to respond to Mr. Galton's?
I think Mr. Galton might be referring to the saving that's set out in paragraph 19, where there's a reference to saving £35,000, and that leading growing to 60,000 by 2024-25. That's an assumption made about growing fee income. It is subject to, as is pointed out in the second of the 2 paragraphs under 19, subject to the national review of planning application fees that we're expecting to take place and following the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill gaining royal assent. But our assumption is that we will see a rise in planning application fees. So that will enable us to make that saving.
Increase fees, because what's been asked for over a number of years is that fees actually match the cost of processing, which they never have they? So if they don't do that, then you'd be struggling to make this saving.
Yeah. The assumption we've made is that fee income will rise anyway due to sort of increased numbers of applications. So we're working on that basis, but obviously there is an assumption that the fees will actually go up as well. So we will need to adjust it when we see the precise fee regime from the government. But we're reasonably confident that there will be an increase. Obviously, it's a bit lumpy because you can't predict how many applications are going to come in any one year. So as you'll see at the end of that first paragraph, we've had lower income this year than we expected, but we're expecting that to be compensated for by next year.
Okay, thank you. And the other one was related to that, was heritage team structure review.
Yes, so this is where it's now considered that the ongoing provision of in-house staffing around that issue isn't warranted by the level of planning applications that require a dedicated historic building advice. We have previously as well provided that advice to district councils, and they've no longer required that from us. Obviously, we will still need some of that advice. Some of that can be provided from within the team with existing expertise, but sometimes we'll need to procure that advice from external consultants. But the overall impact is that saving of £20,000.
So is that a redundancy then?
I think that's being worked through in terms of a review of that service. So whether it ends up being a redundancy or not, I think it remains to be seen.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Paragraphs 15 to 16, growth proposals. Any comments, questions on those? Mrs. Hack.
I just wondered whether or not you could provide a bit more detail on the gain share receipt. Sorry, I don't know that scheme. So whether it could come in after the meeting or what, that's fine. Thank you.
Just very briefly, through the Superfast Leicestershire broadband project, we obviously provided support to the rollout of broadband across the county, and that obviously supported Openreach to make that provision. The gain share, we receive a gain share payment from Openreach depending on what the take up is, where that rollout has happened. So that subsidised rollout leads to people taking up the service. That provides obviously more business for Openreach, and then they make a payment back to us. So that's the receipt we get, and we've received several £1 million over the years. And it's one of the reasons why we've been promoting take up so much, obviously because it's a benefit to local people, but also the council does get that gain share receipt from the higher take up.
Simon, did you want? Oh, no, sorry. Okay, cool. All right. Okay. Paragraphs 17 to 32 are the savings proposals. Does anyone wish to be comment? Over to you then, Bizzy.
Thank you, Chairman. Page 73, point 24 and later 40. That is in relation to the review of the Shire grant. This has been very emotive with a lot of members all through, and I would like to suggest that we have a 5-member panel on this item to set terms and of reference in relation to discussing that, whether, you know, we want to cut it, whether we want to keep it, what amount of money we're putting to it, whether the actual projects we're providing are right. So just in general, a 5-member panel, any comments from members welcome. And I'm looking for a seconder to put a 5-member panel forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Pryor. Okay, this is something we can bring to the next Scrutiny Commissioners meeting.
Yes, of course, after we've done all of the budget and everything, yes. So we set it at terms of reference at the Commission and then see how we take it from there. Yes, thank you.
Comments on the savings proposals?
Yeah, not directly related, but just thinking about this recent issue members have been informed about, of a consultation going on about combining the coroner's service into one county and city. Is it expected that will produce any savings?
Not in the short term. In the long term, yes. The merger should take place on the 1st of April, but unfortunately, the costs have risen in relation to pathology, post-mortems, and the overall casework has increased quite considerably. So that's offsetting any potential saving. But in the long term, with one senior coroner and an area coroner hosted by the City Council, which is the best place it can be from an efficiencies point of view, I believe it will bring in efficiencies, albeit that there is an increase in demand on the service.
When you say, sorry, when you say an increase in demand, is that, I know there's been quite a lot of publicity around this recently, issue about a higher rate of, there's a phrase for it, isn't there? Excess deaths, that's right.
Yeah, excess deaths, yeah, is one factor. But of course, in terms of what a coroner looks at, determines really on the complexity of the case and the type of case that it's likely to be. But if you look at the overall figures, there is an increase in referrals for inquests. So that does increase. Now, of course, that may reduce over time, but the on cost, as I say, is the significant factor. So we are paying probably around 4 times more on post-mortem fees, because the NHS decided we were paying bottom dollar previously, that's fair to say, but there was no negotiation. As you can appreciate, there's only so many organisations that offer pathology, so we've got nowhere else to go, so we've simply had to absorb that cost, and that's been quite considerable, and it's non-negotiable with the NHS at the minute.
Thank you. Mrs. Page.
Thank you. Page 75.32, place marketing teams. Where are we at? Where are we going? Could we have a little bit of an update on that, please?
Yes, well, there were ongoing discussions around the business rate pool and how the funding in that pool is allocated amongst the local authorities. But one of the considerations within that is to fund the place marketing work that's hosted at the City Council and jointly funded by the county and city councils from the business rates pool rather than from the council's own budgets. So that's an ongoing discussion at the moment.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any comments on the saving proposals? No. Okay, which brings us on to paragraphs 33 to 41, which is external influences, other funding sources and capital programme. Any comments, questions on that? No. Okay. Does anyone else want to make any comment on that item before we close on it? No. Okay. Thank you very much for everyone who participated in that. That moves on to item 10, which is the medium-term financial strategy for the Corporate Resources Department. Chris Tambini will be introducing the report, supported by Declan Keegan and Assistant Directors Gordon McFarlane and Jane Glasgow. Mr. Brecken, as lead member for resources, is remaining for this item, and we've also Mr. Bedford, lead member for recovery and transformation, joining us online. Welcome, Mr. Bedford. And again, following the schedule, which is now on page 3 of your additional schedule, Chris, are you going to introduce this report? Thank you.
Yeah. Similarly, I'm going to do a pretty kind of brief introduction. I can pick up any issues through questions. So just like the overall County Council's budget, the budget for corporate resources does look tough, but I think it is manageable. If you look at the growth, we tried our best to kind of minimise the amount of growth we put forward, and the net growth over the 4 years is only £35,000, which is pretty low. And at the same time, the savings are significant. So over the 4 years, it's £5.7 million worth of savings, and next year alone, it's 2.4 million. Again, the savings do look achievable, but it is going to require a certain amount of focus and a lot of hard work, particularly from the assistant directors who are at the table. The key risk, and again, we could get into this in questions if members want to, is still around commercial. So clearly, commercial services did suffer as part of the pandemic. And then since the pandemic, with inflation, again, that's had a real headwind in terms of our commercial services, particularly as the key ones are around hospitality, particularly school meals, has had a big impact. So again, that's something that we're reviewing in detail at the moment, and we're expecting to make some kind of decisions around some of those services for the first part of this financial year. I think that's all I was going to say by way of introduction.
Thank you, Chris. Mr. Brecken.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just sort of, I'm pleased with the way the department has performed and delivered over the last year, considering it has such a wide range of services. The frontline services such as Country Parks, Travellers Unit and Customer Services Centre have delivered time and time again, day in, day out for our residents. Chris has mentioned the trading services are adapting to a post-COVID world and continue to deliver services that schools depend on, such as school meals, ICT support and facilities management, but we need to get them performing within their own budget and being cost effective. The back office functions continue to play an essential role in the running of a good council, and I hope you'll all agree with that. Savings delivery will be challenging. Chris has outlined those, but there are some exciting projects on the way, including ways of working, which reduce the cost of our office accommodation while facilitating closer working with our health colleagues. But it is pleasing to see that ICT is not just supporting the modernisation of services, but it's reducing their costs at the same time. Commercial services, I think that the flavour of this MTFS meeting is continuing to face several headwinds. A lot of good work is taking place so we can reduce our losses. The size of the losses mean that all options need to still be on the table. I think I'd just finish by saying it's obviously disappointing this is Chris's last MTFS that he'll present to us, but rest assured I will keep pressing the director that comes into place to replace Chris to deliver more of the benefits for residents and to keep the pressure on. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brecken. So if we move over to questions, comments from members relating to paragraphs 1 to 13, Appendix A, to start with the introduction, service overview, revenue budget and changes and transfers. Does anyone have any comments on that part of the report? No, okay, so that moves on to part 2, paragraphs 14 to 18 is the growth proposals. Any questions, comments on that? Mr. Golden.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think it's kind of related to both, really. It's really about where we're going with County Hall and staff working. I had to come in the other day because they couldn't fix my laptop remotely, so I had to come in. I was astonished at the number of empty desks in corporate services. There was just nobody there. There was about half a dozen people, where normally it would be buzzing. You'd see hundreds of people. So I'm assuming these people are working from home. They're still with us. They're doing good work. But I just wonder where we're going with that, because this has now been going on quite a while. Is there a policy on working from home? Is it just left to managers' discretion? Is there a plan to get people back working? You know, I have the view it's okay to be working home sometimes, but sometimes it's good actually to be in your place of work where you can talk to colleagues, catch up on issues, and not sit at home on your own all day. Do we have a policy on that, where we're going with it? Thank you, Chair.
To respond, Gordon.
Yeah, happy to pick that up. I think you're absolutely right. We're not optimizing the use of the campus yet, but we're heading in that direction. The Ways of Working programme was revised post-COVID, and it was very much learning from something that was enforced and moving into something that is a long-term plan. And we're very much, the language we're using is around hybrid working, so a mix of working remotely and working from the office. We'd asked every head of service to come up with a detailed action plan, which they'll keep on, and they'll keep those plans under review, just in terms of how they're, given we've got a wide range of different services with different demands on them and different ways of working, but how they can best operate in this new environment. And what we don't want to do is go down the line of saying everybody come in 2 days a week, because people will come in and sit on Teams calls. We want people to come in when it's right for them to come in, to mix with colleagues, to collaborate, to think about their health and well-being, etc. But the primary objective is, this is business-led. Yes, it's about individuals as well, but it's business-led. We are seeing an increase in the use of the building, and we've also got an increase in the number of tenants. And you'll see later on, some of the projected figures. So we're heading in the right direction. I think a sense check for us is that we're no different to any other, say, upper tier local authority. And if we weren't doing this, if we insisted on people coming into the office, I think we'd have a really adverse effect on our recruitment and retention. The world has changed and people's expectations have changed.
Mr. Brecken, do you want?
Could I just add to what Gordon says? I mean, the Employment Committee received regular report. It's almost a standard item now as to the ways of working, the updates for staff and staff wellbeing and welfare. So that is well reported and it's well documented as well. So just for members' peace of mind.
I think, Mr. Bedford, did you want to comment on this?
Yeah, just to add on to what Gordon said. I mean, we shouldn't really conflate the two issues here. I mean, the Ways of Working programme was developed prior to COVID. I think sometimes members get a bit conflate the two issues of COVID and ways of working and working from home. So, before COVID, we were looking at better ways to utilise the county council campus. So part of that is driven by obviously making efficiencies and savings in our budget. But just to reassure Simon, I have ongoing conversations with Gordon about attendance at County Hall and ensuring that our productivity doesn't drop and remains the same, and also to encourage, it's not right if people work at home 100% of the time. It's probably not right if they're in the office 100% of the time. I think this hybrid model is certainly the way that most companies and organisations are going. But I do take your point, Simon, that if we're not getting the productivity, then we will keep all options under review. But I think at the moment, a hybrid way of working is the right approach. But if that does affect, if we are seeing an impact on productivity, of course we may have to get firmer on our kind of policy approach to this. Thanks, Chair.
Cheers. Mrs. Hack, did you want to come in next?
Thank you, Chair. In the proposal on 15, we're indicating we're looking at a temporary removal of reductions to the customer service centre. So are we seeing a reduction in the number of people trying to get in touch with us? Have we got a particular service improvement from a technology point of view that's going to alleviate the need not to have as many colleagues in the customer service centre?
Jane, did you want to come in on that?
Thank you. There's a combination of factors. We put a customer program in place about 2 years ago with the firm intent of creating a sustainable customer service center. And what that meant in practice was reducing the amount of demand that we had, while still recognizing that we were seeing growth in terms of the need for blue badges, for example, concessionary travel, etc. And we've adopted new ways of working, new operating models, a combination of new technologies, and new business processes in the back office as well, which has meant that what we're seeing is on services we're implementing now, we're getting adoption rates of online applications or inquiry of 95 to 97%. And when you compare that to where we were sort of 3 years ago, we were anywhere between 35 and 70%. We're also doing things like making sure as people connect into the CSC on the telephone, that we're just reminding people that those online options are available and they can often be quicker and people prefer to interact in that way, which means that we're also seeing some of that traffic. The other thing that we're doing as well is we're creating more online feedback loops. So if you look at home to school transport admissions and so forth, we're being very proactive about providing feedback to the parents to make sure that every couple of weeks they get an email from us, just letting them know where we're at, what we're doing. And that avoids a lot of that contact. That's just to check in and see how people are doing.
Thank you. Did you want to come back in, Mrs. Hack?
So obviously in terms of the programme that we've got, are we seeing that, people who ring the county council, are they having to wait short amount of time? What's the average waiting time? We anticipate that will grow if we're reducing the amount of colleagues. What kind of metrics are we looking at with that? Thank you.
Yes, so we measure both in real time and on a monthly basis what that looks like. And what we're seeing is a vast majority of people are waiting somewhere between about a minute and a half to maybe about 12, 13 minutes. We do see some outliers and we do see some calls pushing past 20, but those are usually in one of two circumstances. Key crunch periods around school admissions, again, homeschool transport, key periods, those types of things. Now, our performance is not as good on the adult side as it is on the environment transport children's side as well. That's predominantly due to our ability to hire suitably qualified people. And that's an issue with the workforce at the moment.
Thank you. I've got Mrs. Page followed by Mrs. Pryor and Mr. Poland.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. It was actually on the same, on the customer service centre. And for me as a member, the customer service centre is a lifeline because because it's very difficult with the home working now to get hold of an officer, and so you go through the CSC. However, at times the CSC has got problems getting hold of officers and coming back with a response. And so is that monitored or are they set guidelines? For instance, we used to have a communication protocol response within 5 days. So, if you can talk me around that a little bit. And before I rest my case, I also have got a question on number 17, because we are talking in relation to hybrids, saving money, being more efficient, etc., etc. Yet we are talking that there is another £70,000 put towards communication to remain, to ensure that staff remains connected. And I keep seeing these financial inputs. Are they actually value for money? Is it costing me more to keep people at home? So I'd like that. And number 18, please explain to me what a lone working app is. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, if I come in on the first point, you're absolutely right. there is a challenge at the moment around making sure that officers respond in as timely a manner as we like. There are two things that we're doing about that. The first one is there's been, especially from an environment and transport perspective, because I know that's where a lot of the issues have been, there's some work going on at the moment to change how that process happens and how we get the feedback loops and how the CSC monitors the response times from the department. So that's going on. The other side of that as well is there's additional work being done on the wide air operating model. So it is absolutely an area that we need to work on, but it is actively being worked on.
If I may come back, so the reduction in funding will not affect that in any way, because it is very important. If you recall, originally members had their own telephone number, which was 0071 or whatever, and that has now stopped. So we also got to wait in line, and I'm concerned that the members' connection to CSC, who are doing a marvelous job, is continued.
The area that's causing the challenge is when the CSC member reaches out to an officer in one of the departments. There's a process they go through. That process does currently have an inadequate feedback loop to make sure that that process happens. So what's being put in place is that the CSC is going to be actively monitoring the officer response. At the moment, it is a little bit of fire and forget, and then the information is updated from the department back into the CSC systems. So we need to create that loop that makes sure that it's being tracked and we can push if that happens. Okay.
Gordon.
Gordon, sorry.
I'll try and pick up the other 2 points briefly. I think comms team sits with Jane, you might want to comment about resources, but effectively, yes, we're adjusting to different ways of working, and yes, there's a small increase in the budget here that is hugely offset by the significant savings of the ways of working program. And I suppose the broader comment is just to address your point around is it costing us more for people working remotely? That it would cost us a lot more to revert to office working. And have everybody, back in the office, and the policy around that. We've talked about that in the previous point. If I can just pick up the lone working app, we've got a lot of frontline workers who are out, working with clients. They're out on their own, nature of their job. There are risks associated with that, and we've trialled a few different solutions, if you like, for them to be able to get in touch should there be an emergency. And the one that's come out strongest, if you like, is an app that can be downloaded on somebody's phone. They can discreetly press a button if they get into trouble, and it will then alert. And we can, with the company involved, we can take the appropriate action. So it's a moderate spend for something that will really reduce risk and vulnerability out there in the community.
If I may come back through you, Chairman, I think that's quite wonderful. Maybe councillors should have one of those as well when they're being threatened by residents. Coming back to the moderate input in relation to hybrid working, has IT cost and all the update of IT also been taken into consideration in the analysis of the cost for evaluating hybrid to campus working? Thank you, both of you.
The simple answer is yes. As you can imagine, the infrastructure impact is significant because essentially what we've done is create a virtual campus online. But what we did at the same time was we took out a lot of the existing infrastructure. So if you remember, we used to use VDI and technology like that, which had a significant capital cost as well of about 2.1 million from memory. So a lot of that has offset the cost of the new laptops, the infrastructure, those types of things. Additionally, in the business case for the Ways of Working program, those costs were baked in and built into the program to ensure that the ultimate savings value that we see takes into consideration those. There was some increases in terms of small increases, in terms of some support capability, as well as some infrastructure changes, etc. But we're also still being able to reduce the IT spend over the next MTFS period by, I think, about 1.2 million. because we got Gartner in last year. They did a review, full budget analysis, the whole thing, and were able to help us identify ways of coming at our support models differently, some of our delivery processes differently as well. So we've managed to both add the additional scope whilst also reduce the service team.
Mrs. Fryer.
Thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Chairman, I have just 2 or 3 points to make. I appreciate that we are doing the very best on the welfare of our staff, particularly with the hybrid working and following up for welfare. I'm a bit concerned about the learning aspects, particularly for our new staff and younger staff that are coming to join us, that you learn from working in a team face to face. Now, we all went through this through lockdown. This meeting would have been in lockdown. Now, I'm not going to turn to James in public and say, by the way, I've got a problem. I don't understand this. So I'm most concerned that we want our younger, new people to feel welcome, to learn from the other more experienced people, and to get a handle on how this council works. I believe we do have some that are graduates or apprentices, and the only way they're going to learn is in a team. The other point I have, as we are doing this more hybrid working, are we looking at the use of this building and campus? I have been reassured that there are more tenants coming in. It would be useful, I think, to know roughly how many. Are we still actively looking for new tenants, and what type of tenants are we looking for? But also to maybe re-evaluate how this building for staff and councillors is being used. I mean, are there wings of the building that maybe only have half a dozen people in, because it always has been that department? So I would just like a bit of clarification on that, if I may. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gordon, did you?
Sounds like it'll be me again. Yeah. I think just to take each point in turn, absolutely right around staff welfare, really important, staff well-being. And in terms of learning, and you make the point around new and younger staff, we've revised our corporate induction process, but more importantly, the obvious messages to give to managers are, if somebody's starting new with us or somebody's inexperienced, bring them into the office, they meet people, they spend time face to face, absolutely. And I think it's then working through that balance of face to face and creating virtual networks as well, so that people do feel comfortable picking up the phone or whatever, and we don't have to come in. But there's a real benefit to coming in when you start getting to know people and understanding your job, but also the context you're working in. I think the use of the campus, clearly we are still talking to potential tenants. There's obviously a commercial sensitivity around those conversations, as you'd appreciate, and there's some negotiations taking place. But you can see that the tenants we have in now are NHS tenants, various NHS organisations. What we're doing is probably links to your third point, is that we're refurbishing floor by floor for the areas that we need. And once we settle each department into a floor, we're kind of releasing where they were. Now, that's either then putting another department or bunch of services into that space, or it releases it for rental. So we're doing it in a way that we make sure we have enough space for county council staff, because it's a county council campus, but we also, in a managed way, release space where we can and then maximise the income. So it's kind of a game of Tetris, but we're plotting through that very carefully.
Mr. Bedford, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, Gordon's covered a lot of the kind of detail behind it, but just to give you my view and my comments on the kind of political aspects of this. So one of the points Rosita made was around contacting officers. Now, in my view, is quite clear that you should be able to continue to work with officers as you did before COVID. You know, this programme, as I said, started before COVID, so any contact with officers and departments should be the same, regardless of whether you're at County Hall or you're working remotely. So you should still have that same line of connection with different departments. On Hillary's point around the benefits of working together in person, I totally agree. My expectation would be that, you know, teams would continue to have, you know, regular team meetings, those kind of collaboration, sharing types of meetings and engagement in person regularly. So this certainly isn't, you know, the county council's policy is everyone work from home. It's very much you should utilise as best possible. And I would say, you know, for team meetings, group activities, you know, they should be done in person. Those members that were at the Ways of Work briefing we held in December, we had a tour of the refurbed area, and actually we had a really good conversation with Jana from Highways, who kind of told us how she was managing the team through the new kind of ways of working. It seemed to be working really well because, you know, people came in for those kind of collaboration activities. You know, when you've got a big plan in place where you're looking at various schematics, it's far better to do that kind of activity in person than looking at, you know, diagrams on the screen. So the policy is very much, you know, the space should be, it's there to be utilised. As Gordon says, we're still exploring commercial opportunities, but, you know, the primary focus of this is ensuring that we maintain that good service to members of the public. And if productivity does decline, then obviously we will need to review that. But that's the approach we're taking. Thanks, Chair.
April's meeting of the Commission does have an item on ways of working, so we're looking at this subject in detail, including property, so we can go through it a lot then as well. Mr. Poland.
Thank you, Chairman. Based on what you just said, perhaps it's more of a question for April than now, but I think ways of working, as we've heard in this debate so far, has definitely got its pluses and minuses. My personal view is that it's more positive than negative, generally speaking, although taking on board Councillor Fryer's points. A couple of questions on that, if that's okay. Again, just to really follow on from the last question, a bit more detail. When we're working through the floors and moving teams, are we still coming back to saying that there is X departments and that there is Y departments, or we're going for a more fluid sort of structure where we go, actually you can book out a meeting room as and when needed? So we're going away from the that's my desk and no one else's to more of as I say, a fluid structure which would leave less space. That's my first question. And I guess as a side point to that, does it save us money in terms of energy? Because presumably if we have less people and we're more centred, we're not needing to heat and lights and those sorts of things, parts of the building. And second of all, in terms of the flexibility for people working at home, I guess it would depend on the role and department, but are we allowing people the flexibility to sort of go off and do things within their lives, like collect children and so forth during the working day? Because as a parent to two young kids myself, the ability to collect kids during the working day would save hundreds and hundreds of pounds per month. You know, that works out more than half my wife's wages, and we only put ours in two days a week as a concept. So that sort of benefit that you'd have to your personal life and personal finances would be immense. And if we were to sort of go back to an older, previous way of working where we say, right, we've got to be more in the office now, we'd risk potentially losing good people who like the freedom of the current structure.
Thanks. Three really good points, actually. I think in terms of the floor layouts, we are looking at departments and services being together. So, for example, in room 700, we've got adult social care teams and we've got environment and transport teams, and they're in separate parts of room 700. We don't have, unless somebody needs it for a particular reason, we don't have fixed desks for people. We have a desk booking system, and we also obviously have meeting room booking systems as well as the kind of collaborative, the more informal collaborative furniture that people use. So that's a very quick summary of the model, if you like. The saving on costs around energy is trickier. We do have the ability to kind of stand down parts of the building, but given the length of time it takes to heat, you know, a building like this, it's difficult. What we are doing though is working on kind of more
green solutions, if you like. So we've certainly had some grants. We've got a biomass boiler. We've had some work done recently in how that's being fed. So we're trying to reduce the costs of heating and lighting the building anyway, regardless of that. And then obviously we do get those overhead costs covered by tenants for the bits of the building that they're using. And then the third point around that flexibility for individuals, the broad answer would be yes, but I suppose the caveat with that is the business comes first, the service comes first. So within all that action planning that I talked about earlier, if you've got the type of job where you can flex, you can go out for 20 minutes, half an hour during the day, whatever it may be, or work in the evening, you're not on a rota in the customer service centre, for example, then, come to a broad agreement with your manager and make that work. And you're absolutely right that this is the way the world's going. And if people don't have some flexibility, again, business need first, some flexibility, we're starting to see them looking elsewhere. Or they'll come to us because they're not getting that elsewhere. And we've got examples of that too. Okay.
Mr. Frisbee. Thank you, Chair. My point is slightly historic after everything that's been said. Firstly, I'd like to thank Mr. McFarlane for, I was part of that group, the Ways of Working, and I felt that it was a very robust and thorough working group, and I think that things were investigated, so thank you. Mine's just going back really to the point that was made about digitisation. I come from an area that is still yet slightly disconnected in terms of the demographic of our elderly folk. I've heard an awful lot about the online portals and being redirected through this, that and the other. I'm here this morning really to represent my mum, who's not online and has absolutely no intention of going online at 84 years old. She wants to speak to a human being. Can I have some assurances that as much as we are going into the digital domain, there will still be some acceptance that some of our senior citizens will be able to speak to a human being as they always have? Thank you.
Absolutely. It's a very straightforward answer. There will be a percentage of people who will need an accessible route for a wide variety of reasons. And we will be working with the Equalities Challenge Group and others to make sure we accommodate for that. We have been talking to a number of other authorities about how they're doing it, so we're taking learnings from our neighbours and from the wider sector as well. But the simple answer is yes, of course.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That now moves us on to paragraphs 19 to 41, savings program. Mrs. Taylor, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points which have probably been already mentioned, but I will just say it. Just going back to Simon's report about coming in here and no staff, I think it depends what department you go through as to whether you think there's people here as well. But just to remind, we've got lots of locality sites as well, and they are probably quite more people in there, the localities, than there are centrally in County Hall. So just to remember that. The point about children's services, we're spread over 3 different rooms at the moment. So when we move into room 600, there will be in one large room, so all children and family services will be together, which I think will be a lot better for collaboration. We'll probably encourage more people to come back in when they're with wider colleagues as well. So I think that will work better for us. And just going back to this point about contacting officers, and I don't know whether this is something that when you come to talk about in April that you consider it, but you can contact every officer through Teams. They don't have to be in the office for you to be able to ring them. You can instant message an officer through here and you can email them. So I can't remember the last time that I actually ran the call centre because, and I know you're going to say, Rosie will say that's because you're deputy leader. No, it isn't. If you're dealing with an issue with an officer, you can ring them through Teams. So they don't need to be in the office. You can contact them through that instant message or email. So I think there is a route there for us, but I'm keen to hear what Jane said about that loop for CSC members, because you don't get that feedback, and that's what prompts you to then chase because you've not got the feedback. So it's getting that right in the first place. But there is all an option to ring any officer through Teams, and I do it quite often.
They're working at night.
I wouldn't expect you to be ringing an officer at night, but generally you can send them an email or ask them to call you through Teams at a convenient time. So there always is a route through rather than us going through the switchboard. So I just wanted to put that out there. So it might be something, whether there's a protocol that we need to look at about contacting officers through Teams. So that might be something that you want to consider at your April meeting. But I think that's definitely a route where members should be contacting officers.
Thank you, Mrs. Taylor. So does anyone have any questions, comments on paragraphs 19 to 41 savings proposals?
No.
Mrs. Hack,
Yes.
and then
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Just a really quick one. CR8, the sale of Castle House. I'm assuming we would have had a rental income from that. So has that been factored into the overall financials? Sure, it has, but I just wanted to delve a little bit into that one, please.
But there was a small rental income, but it was a net cost to the council, hence why it's a saving. Yeah.
Page.
Yes, and that it's also a small point, page 90, point 23. Could we have some information on the Nottingham Community Housing Association, how it will work and how it will pan out?
Nottingham Community Housing just acted, I suppose, as the building manager, as it were. So sort of they'll just manage the sort of sites. So we don't have a sort of obviously a housing function as a county council. So it was really that activity just outsourced to them. So the day-to-day kind of tenants needs just go through Nottingham Community Housing Association initially. So it's as simple as that, really.
Mrs. Hack.
Apologies, Chair. I'm not sure if I should have declared an interest. I work for a competitor to NCHA. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Hack. Any more questions on that element of the document? If not, paragraphs 42 to 48, Capital Programme, Appendix C. Any comments, questions on that? No. Any other final comments from anyone else on this item? No. Thank you very much, everybody, for answering questions and for your questions on that item. So we now move to item 11, where we consider the responses from the other overview and scrutiny committees regarding the relevant parts of the medium-term financial strategy, which they've looked at in respect of each department. Copies of the minutes extracts from each of the committees were circulated to all members on Friday, and these have all been published on the council's website. Officers, lead members, did you have any comments to add to these?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Referred earlier to the savings that are being proposed, and obviously go back to Cabinet in a few weeks' time to consider the scrutinies processes. But just picking up on a couple, I'm afraid they're well, three actually. They're all in the environment, transport, highways area. So the first is, and it's really to ask the leader and the lead member for finance to give some further thought, particularly in relation to this £1 million that you've referred to. So the first is the Members Highways Fund. Now, I realise that was a 2-year limited scheme, and I realise that that is not going to continue. But the reality is you're taking a rough calculation, a number of members, about £500,000 of spending out of that service area. So the scheme's going in terms of members deciding, but you are taking an investment in highway activities, getting jobs done, improvements to the tune of about £500,000 is coming out of the budget. So just wondered what your reaction to that is and what scope there might be for putting some of that back into the department, not through the Members Highway Fund, but through spending on highway schemes. The second was the average speed camera. Now, you know, this, if I'm right, was one of your manifesto commitments, Nick. And I appreciate the fact that we haven't been able to persuade the Treasury to let us keep the income. And I never really felt that was realistic, because I don't think they would give that up unless perhaps part of the top tier combined authority deal. Although it'd be interesting to know if any of the others have achieved that, West Midlands and so on and so forth. But it just seemed to me this was a bit short-sighted. To the savings relatively small, 50,000 for not rolling out this, and there is a list of potential areas that were going to be assessed for the rollout of average speed cameras, and I just think you might have another look at this, because I think that I don't know if we've done any work on how many accidents, lives, fatalities and serious have been saved as a result of these. But, and I don't want to look at it in financial terms, but that's why we did it, wasn't it? It wasn't done to raise money. It was done to try and reduce accidents. I'll just make a personal plea, which is quite shocking. I've had in the last 10 days, I've had 2 fatalities on the A47 East, which you may have read about. We don't have any average speed cameras, but I'm shortly going to be talking to Jana that we actually need to reduce speed on that road, I think by 50, right the way through the county section to the Rutland boundary. And then the issue becomes how you back that up. So yeah, you can change the speed limit if you don't back that up with some enforcement. So I just make a plea. I'm not making a plea for mine. I'm just saying as a scheme, I think it's been quite successful, and 50k is not a huge amount of money that you might find. And then the third area, just to mention briefly, the bus services. We're talking about going to, I forget the phrase that was used, it was kind of really important journeys restricted down. I think 200,000 further to come out that. I'm right in saying we haven't actually finished the last review yet, are we? Because of COVID, we had to stop that review. I think there really ought to be an aspiration at the very minimum of keeping some sort of public transport link from the county towns, the major towns into Leicester. I appreciate we can't do what we used to do anymore. We didn't get that bid that I know officers put a lot of work into to try and get some money into that area. We weren't successful. But to my mind, that is another one that you might really want to have another look at. It's not a huge amount of money, that 200,000, but we're going to be left with virtually nothing left in terms of supported network because the commercial companies are also struggling on some of their routes as well. Thank you, Chair. Just those 3 things, if they could be looked at again.
Yeah, on the obviously the A47, I know it well, Sam. It really is quite dangerous. I mean, the problem we've got with average speed cameras, it's not just the revenue cost, the 50,000. It's the 500,000 of capital costs to put them in. So it's not something we really wanted to do. It's something that's we've got to do. I mean, if there was more money in the future, we'd certainly like to have done more. And the idea was to make them movable. You know, some people have said, you know, the one I come through up, you know, from Groby all the way down, everybody's doing the correct speed limit now because they know it's there. If it was movable, it would probably be a good idea to move. But you can't move the ones we've got. It's really hard to move them. It is something we would like to have done, obviously, to put more in and then to be movable. So, you know, it really is about money. On the highways maintenance, I think we've said that any underspends, and Declan will confirm it, will go into day-to-day maintenance. I think that is what we're going to do with any of the savings which we've now not got to make can go into highways maintenance. On the buses, it really is difficult. As you know, since COVID, usage is down 20%, costs are up 20%. And that's across the piece. So we've subsidised very few, really, buses. I think it's like 10% out of the 100%, and the costs are just going through the roof. So we have a policy that you have to be within so many meters of a hourly bus service, which we're trying to sustain. But I think going forward, it will not mean buses with nobody on. There will be more demand responsive transport. And things like that. It is very, very difficult. I mean, I've got one that will be almost certainly under threat that trudges all the way through my villages from Ashby to Loughborough, and the people that use it certainly value it. But when you look at it in numbers terms, some of them, you know, there's one in Hinckley, I think, which costs 160,000 to subsidise. Now, it's only costing us 160,000 to subsidise because not enough people on it. If it was full, it wouldn't cost anything to subsidise. It is very, very difficult, and it's a consequence of the financial situation we're in. We've already put council tax up to the maximum, which, as you can imagine, was not particularly popular in my group. You know, not particularly popular with the general public, I wouldn't imagine. But the financial situation does mean we do have to make difficult decisions. Of course, I'd like hourly bus services running, but maybe we've got to think of the future and not have buses trundling around with not many people on them, and try and provide the links that certain people require through other means. I think Declan will tell you about the money that I'm always aspirational to get money into highways. I've got loads of blessed parish councils, and that's all they ever go on about. Same as you, you've probably got more than me, but Declan will tell you about the money.
So this is the £1 million to reduce the service reduction. So that, I suppose it's unring fence money, as it were. So as Cabinet makes its decision, if it doesn't allocate all that £1 million to offset the service reductions, it's free to go to other priorities, of which obviously highways is a key one that gets raised a lot.
Yeah, would we get support from this commission for asking the Cabinet to look at that very seriously? Because I think the state of the highways is deteriorating. Nobody can deny that through lack of.
It would be useful if you want to say that, because it's something I want to do anyway. So you type of pushing at an open door. You know, we all, you know, I say blessed parish councils, but they are the people on the ground, and most of my postbag is about day-to-day stuff: potholes, pavements, dirty road signs, hedges overgrowing sidewalks, you know, just normal bog standard stuff. Everybody, I think, appreciates that we look after the elderly and look after the children, but it's the same old problem, Simon. Only 85% pay, only 15% consume if you're looking at the financial profile, and the people that aren't getting any benefits think they get nothing for their council tax money. I mean, you know, I live in represent a fairly rural, wealthy, affluent area, and they keep saying, what do I get from my now 1,500 quid council tax? Well, I say you get your bin emptied, and you know, so it is really, really important that we do try and help with the little issues which we all pick up and fill our postbag. So in my view, you'd be pushing us an open door to ask for any spare money goes into day-to-day bread and butter, highway, environmental type issues.
May I just come in, Chairman? Just as a point of information, it's a shame Ozzy is poorly. He could have helped out, but I had an issue in relation and I raised it. And I spent a long time raising all the issues with officers, and I had some meetings with Anchor, other service managers, etc., which was really, really valuable. And I was wondering, before we look, maybe we could have an all members briefing so members can see exactly what I saw, which makes it more understandable what the implications are, the backlog of potholes that we have got, the way they work at Cosby, and I think, and then we can take it from there. But there is an awful lot of information that is really, really valuable for members to understand. And I'm not excusing the state of the road, but I think members need to know, first of all, the constraints we're working in.
Mr. Becken, did you have your hand up?
It was just to answer Simon's point on the Members Highways Fund. It was always additional funding we put in for 2 years. It was a manifesto pledge. We did it for a year, but we did extend it to the second year. So, but it was additional funding. So it's not a case that we've taken money out. It was just additional money we could spend on those schemes that the members brought forward. So it is a shame, but we just don't have the money to continue that scheme, because that would have been helpful, certainly to us as well.
Just further on the speed cameras, we did actually at one time go down to the House of Parliament to meet. I think the minister at the time was Robert Jenrick, and we weren't allowed to do it. When we went, we said to them, we don't want to make a profit, which the government doesn't want us to do because it's incentivizing us to catch people speeding. All we wanted to do was for it to wash its face, so I could continue to roll the same. I think it's only about 500,000 we wanted to roll. So once we got to the 500,000 to pay back the capital, they could keep all the money, and then we could put some more in. But we weren't allowed to do it, and it's the Treasury, I think, is the problem, rather than whatever it is now, DLUC or whatever they are, Department of Transport. You never quite know, but that was our problem. I mean, it's still an aspiration if we could, because where they are in, Simon, they are, I won't say they're popular, but they certainly have the effect which they're supposed to have, which is reducing the speed of traffic in either dangerous roads or roads where people don't like them going past quite so fast. But we refused. I mean, we could have another go, but no one thought we'd do any good. But
Did you want to come back at all, Simon, or any further?
No, I assume that there is support then for saying if there is any spare money,
Well,
that's the area it should go to. Not saying spare, there isn't any spare in this place, but if there is money that wasn't known about, Nick suggests we're pushing an open door to suggest that it ought to go into highways maintenance.
through you, Chairman, would members be agreeable to have an all-members briefing on the constraints and on the way the system works? And I think it would be very interesting because, and then, you know, we can take it from there if members still feel they have issues.
No.
Okay, that's not it.
Thank you. Just in terms of sort of bringing in additional money, Simon talked about the bus services, and as the leader and not much of the people in this room know, bus service is something that's close to my heart in my part of the world as well, because we've lost a significant service to Leicester. Without talking about that specifically too much, one of the things that sort of come out of that process is questions in my mind over S106 asks. So I've had a number of large applications in Cosington, one of my villages, which ironically has now lost its bus service completely. And the things we've been asking for are travel packs, which is just literally information on how one theoretically could move about. I'm just wondering whether there's more we can do in terms of requesting money for bus services and even pooling bus services between different applications. So acknowledging that one application for 50 might not be on its own enough, but it is legally possible to pool from different applications so that at some point we can get enough money, or alternatively money for other practical measures. I'm not a transport expert, I'm not an officer, that's not my speciality, but I just think that I just wonder whether there's scope for us to bring in more money to do more things other than theoretical travel packs, which obviously would be at cost to developer and not a cost to us as an authority.
Chris.
I'll have a go. I mean, it's definitely something we can look at. So the only point I'd make is, as we discussed earlier in the meeting, the demands on Section 106 are far greater than we can get in the first place. So we've got these massive issues around schools and transport. But it is something we can look at. There might be some scope to do it for some developments anyway.
Got Mrs. Fack and then Mrs.
Thank you. I think this is more sort of a principal question rather than the specific, but the specific you'll never give an example. So on something like the community speed cameras, do we do the triple bottom line kind of assessment of it? You know, my division, the Narrow Road South, barrier repairs is a cost to the authority all the time. We have cars that flip over. It's, you know, it's pretty horrific how much damage we have to those barriers on Narrow Road South. Do we do any work on actually what the damage of road traffic accidents have to the highway? And do we understand what the other public sector has to pay for these kinds of things to make those, you know, those arguments to government feel much more real, because it's about triple bottom line savings to the public purse?
So I'm going to put my hand up. I don't know the answer to that question, but it's something we can get back to you on detail.
Hey, Mrs. Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm really taking it on up from Mr. Poland's. Mr. Poland's division is next door but one to my division, and we have had an awful lot of development in Barrow-on-Soar and Quorn. Well, village of Barrow-upon-Soar, where I live and have done for 30 odd years, is now probably, I think we've got just under 6,000 residents, and we have no direct bus service to Leicester. They have to go via Quorn, who has 2 buses to go to Leicester. Now, Mr. Poland's division is just down the road, and they've had lots of building. We've got more applications coming through, and I have said for some time, and my residents say, and I'm sure other people do, these travel packs that are provided is a waste of money in that way, because there's no way they can use them anyway, even if they get them. So why not take up and really look at, for example, Quorn, Barrow, Salby, Cossington, and there's 6 villages. I think we cover something like getting on for 30,000 residents who do not have an adequate bus service, and use the money that the county and the 106, I know it's 106 money, but I'm sure at times the developers are saying, well, nobody's going to take up these travel packs, but we'll put them in. And so I really would like that. And I'm sure other councillors would like to see that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We've heard today about the Section 106 money and how much it's going to be used and needed. In fact, there's probably a shortage, but as I understand it, the travel packs, the developers will fund a bus route for a number of years, and then as soon as that those years are over, it reverts to the travel company, and they will no longer run it unless it is commercially viable. I very much take the point that Mrs. Fryer and Mr. Poland have made. I think demand-led transport, or configuring it all together, is a good idea. The reality is the majority of, and this isn't discounting the need for buses, but the majority of houses nowadays are probably got 2 or 3 cars, but there is still a need for a smaller section of the community to have that buses. But there's no easy answer, and the point I make about the Section 106, they will subsidise it for so long, but after that, it will fall off. And I've had bus services whereby that has actually happened. As soon as the time is over, that's it. The bus services will not run it at a loss. It's simple as that.
Yes, point of information. I do agree with Councillor Fryer's point, and it has been taken up by members for an awful long time that we have a look at it. And I believe even some officers agree that those travel packs, and sometimes even on developments, they are not being implemented. So maybe we can get some officers to look at the legal way whether we can actually, instead of having travel packs just for the sake, whether we can use the money to put towards funding for buses. In relation to our briefing, which we said and agreed we would do on highways, if I may just add, maybe we can add the quality of repairs to that, because the quality of road repairs sometimes is so poor that it has to be done very quickly again, and it costs us more money. I believe they call it plugging. And when I had this meeting, just as a matter of information, again, we have got a lady officer whose name escapes me, who was saying that she was working actually on the possibility of securing Section 106 funding from major developers like Magna Park and whatever, because we are always told we cannot charge for road upkeep and whatever, and there was a possibility. So I think it would be nice to know, especially for us who sit on local authorities, what we can actually put in our Section 106 agreement to get from developers in relation to the impact large logistics companies have, so we can put some money into our highways pot again to do that repair we desperately need. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosita. Mr. Frisbee.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going back to my colleague Hilary there, as a point about the cluster of villages. We have in operation some special needs schools where independent travel is very, very important. And it's part of their curriculum that independent travel using buses is a massive step towards their social, financial, digital and social independence. And that has been killed. But in respect of what my colleague Mr. Barclay says, Melton Mowbray, we had severance of our major bus route, which was the 19 from Melton to Nottingham, which we had an awful amount of noise about, that it would have a huge impact on the people who commuted for employment. I can tell this group, this committee, that since we've severed that, we've actually heard nothing from the residents. So it seemed to be an awful lot of noise without a lot of substance underneath it. So I think perhaps there's a little bit more research before we actually commit ourselves to anything in any direction. Thank you, Chair.
Any other comments? So on this item 11, I was just going to ask each of the chairs of the committees if they had any further comments to make on their areas and what responsibility. Mrs. Pryor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no further comments other than it's been made by the lead member and the officers. We know there's difficulties and we know that we do have a challenging time ahead of us in children and families. Thank you.
Mr. Champion in place of Mr. Richardson, any comments?
No, I've got no further comments to make. Obviously just subbing for Mr. Richardson if there's anything that's needed now, and he was happy to answer on email.
Thank you. Mr. Gillard, any comments from your area? Frisbee in place of Mr. Pendleton and
No, Chair. Fine, thank you.
No further comments.
Right, well, thank you. Therefore, I take it we're supportive of the comments made and agree these will be passed to the Cabinet for consideration along with other comments made today. Thank you for everybody for your contributions on that item, which moves us on to the final item on the agenda, item 12, the Corporate Asset Investment Fund Strategy 2023 to 2027, which is pages 105 to 146 on your paperwork. Chris, I believe you're introducing this item and you're joined by John Bennett, Head of the Property Services, and lead member, Mr. Brecken's remaining as well. Chris.
Yeah, John's going to take us through the paper in detail. Just make two comments. The first is that we first established the fund back in 2014 onto the, I suppose, the acute pressure the budget was under at that time, and things haven't particularly changed since 2014. And the second one is that it has been a success. So if you look at the amount of income we're generating, is about a bit over £7 million in next year's budget. And if you weren't doing that, there'd be £7 million of extra service reductions or efficiencies would need to be made as a result of that. So it's been a success. And if you think of the period it's operated through, which is a pandemic, kind of a war in Europe, etc., it has proved to be kind of remarkably robust. So that has been a success story. I'll pass over to John.
Okay, thank you. The fund has just been outlined as being with us since 2014 and has always sought to underpin the strategic outcomes that the County Council has. There has been an emphasis in the past on the income that the fund provides. However, as members will know, some local authorities have been rather reckless in their ways that they've approached the property investment and property acquisitions. And it is against this background that SIPFA and HM Treasury have sought to change their prudential code and their guidance, specifically with regard to the Public Works Lending Board. So whilst the strategy has been with us for a while, it is important that it always maintains relevance. And so whilst the fund strategy at its core doesn't do anything different, it is important to notice that the primary reason for the existence of the fund is not for income. And this revision to the strategy and clarification of this is why I'm here today. So whilst we are still here to provide the fund working for purposes of service delivery, housing, regeneration, where there's been some market failure, or renewable energy, it is not for any margin difference between borrowing money and property income. So what would happen if that wasn't the case? Well, it would mean that we as an authority would not be able to borrow from the Public Works Lending Board for a period of 3 years. So it's very important that the strategy is in place and the fund adheres to the strategy, that income is not the primary reason. It will also not preclude us from undertaking the work and the development that the fund has been doing on places like Airfield Farm in Market Harborough and proposed developments such as the Leaders Farm in Lutterworth, because those schemes will provide jobs and regeneration. Whilst the strategy that's appended to this report still refers to the Corporate Asset Investment Fund, it was felt that perhaps there needed to be a little bit of clarification and renaming of the fund to more properly reflect its revised role. So it's proposed that the fund will be renamed, and the current front runner for this is the Investing in Leicester programme. So whilst the Leicestershire,
I don't think we want to invest in Leicester.
Slip of the tongue there, yes. So the strategy that you have in front of you today reflects the role of the fund in supporting job creation and economic growth. However, the paper that goes to Cabinet, whilst taking on board any comments that the Commission have today, will also have the rebranding. So members will notice that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, John. Mr. Bracken.
I'm not going to duplicate what John said, so thanks, John, for the introduction and the report. I think I'd just say that the Investing in Leicestershire programme is the right way forward, and I think it sets the tone for officers to maximise the contributions to Council's wider objectives, whilst including boosting the Leicestershire economy as well as the financial return. But it is much wider than that. So look forward to Cabinet Scrutiny's comments.
Mrs. Page.
Thank you, and thank you, John. There are so many changes, and I appreciate the success and the robustness, but within the report we are talking about it coming to scrutiny at several stages, and then it talks about it just being part of the annual MTFS. Now I propose, if it is in agreement with anybody else, that before it goes to Cabinet, it comes back, obviously after the budget meeting, to the Commission, just for not only for members to get to know what the actual changes are, what the risks are, but also for members to understand more and to probably look at the actual strategy, because I have got quite a few points of clarities which are needed to be addressed within. And so,
Chairman, it can't, to be fair to Rosita, it can't come back here before the budget. If you want to scrutinise it and have a 5-member panel, whatever, you'll have to do it after the budget.
Okay, no, that's what I mean, after the budget. Sorry, Leader. Yes. So that is my proposal. But before we move on, I've got a couple of questions to John as well. Number one, it is that it says in paragraph 17, up to date, the County Council's auditors have not raised any issues in regards to the size of the management fund. What would happen if they do, and do we have an exit strategy? And the other thing is, how does the guidance we need to actually affected, because it talks about land, but it does not talk about the properties we already hold. And then we are referring to 7% of income. Now, is that net or gross? Because I can never get my head around it. If it's gross, how do we take off all of the cost, etc.? If you can just explain that to me, thank you.
If I pick up the external audit question, I can't imagine any scenario where the external auditors would raise an issue with the corporate asset investment fund as named, or the Leicestershire Investment in Leicestershire kind of programme. Where they've had issues is where I suppose people have gone in this kind of really significantly. So they've borrowed hundreds of millions, if not billions. They've done massive investments on the back of that. And in many cases, those investments have gone wrong. Just to remind members, we've never borrowed a penny to invest in this programme. We've always funded it from either underspends or other capital receipts that we've generated. So we're going at it in a far kind of more prudent manner than most authorities. So I can't imagine if they did, and if they did raise any issues, we'd have to just consider what they'd raised in terms of point by point issue. But I can't imagine that they would, to be honest. And they are fully aware that this is what we're doing. They've been made aware all the way through.
If I can just pick up the point with regard to the portfolio that the fund has at the moment. Yes, we acquired back in 2018-2019 standing investments such as the Lichfield Office Park, Embankment House in Nottingham, and the car dealership in Leicester. As these are pre-November 2020, they have protection, so we're not under an obligation to divest ourselves of them. However, the SIPFA Prudential Code and HM Treasury guidance is now very clear that the fund should not make investment acquisitions of those sort in the future. So we won't.
If I may come back. So it talks about the present, at present, this has not, the power set out in the Act. At present, it has not been required the setting up of a company for property and non-property investment activities of the fund. However, should it be necessary. So can you talk me through that? That's point 36 on page 119. So what would it be necessary at any point? And then what would be the process be?
I think it's something that you'd always try and avoid because you just bring in extra admin costs, corporation tax, etc. So the activities we do at the moment, it's not required. It sort of falls within the remit of the county council. I think that comment only really got in there when you get into if you're doing big housing developments and things like that other organisations have done. But there's at this moment in time, there's nothing on the horizon. But it'd be a case by case basis.
Okay, right, Mr. Poland, did you have your hand up?
Thank you. Just a quick question around understanding, really, and I suppose the second part of it would be more theoretical. So is it the case that we can't borrow to invest for reasons that are primarily income related, or is it that we can't invest in anything that is income related, even using our own funds? And if it's the first one, if it's that we can't borrow to invest, theoretically, could we use our own funds, as it sounds like we've already been doing, to invest anyway, and then if necessary borrow for the purposes of authority business?
If I go back probably over last 6-7 years, this is about the 5th change that the government's done, and every time they've done it, they've ended up having to get more and more draconian because people have sort of found their ways around it. So on the principle, if you don't borrow at all in your capital programme, nothing changes. You can carry on completely sort of unencumbered. But if there's any borrowing at all in your capital programme, government have now decided actually if you've got a penny of borrowing, that relates to commercial investments first before anything else. So that's where it's become a bit of a kicker. So yeah, so like I said, but there's been like 5 or 6 of these and we haven't even sort of batted an eyelid. This is the first one we've had to put a reaction in. As John's touched on it, actually the recent investments, it wouldn't have changed what we'd have done. It's only if we get into, it's more the ones that we went back to originally to establish the funds. You wouldn't do those anymore. But to be honest, we weren't even wanting to do those anyway. So it's not a big deal.
Mr. Mrs. Page.
May I just come back? My question in relation of the 7% has not been answered. So it says an overall target return for the fund is 7%. Now I wonder whether that is gross or net. So if it is gross, then obviously there are overheads, maintenance and whatever. How is that accounted for within, you know, the whole strategy? Well, in a nutshell, is it gross or net?
So the investment return, we do the sort of the acquisition or sort of investment appraisal analysis, includes all costs, all income, all capital growth, etc. So it's an all-encompassing appraisal. But it's net, effectively.
We'll put it next time in the report.
Sorry, just to sort of delve into that a little bit more. Obviously, you know, you're looking at 7% return, but the objective is not to generate return. So how do we square that circle?
You still want, we're going to invest the money, you still want to have sort of well-run sort of financial management. It's just that it can't be purely for that sort of basis. So regeneration, green energy, employment, all that sort of thing is absolutely okay, and that's got to be your principal reason for you doing it. But you can still sort of you still want the assets to be sort of operating as they should do. You wouldn't want to, we're not talking about introducing state aid, things like that. So
thank you. Does any other members have any questions, comments on this item?
Only the other point which I have made, and it wasn't picked up, page 139, and at all different stages in the report, but on 139, 10.12, officers will regularly update. The Director of Resources will provide an annual report and reports to the Scrutiny Commission, as well as updates throughout the year. Now, could we ensure that this will be happening, that we get regular reports, maybe on risk or monitoring, and how do you monitor?
I was going to say, Chair, just to say we'd be happy to do that. We've always come to this Scrutiny Commission with the CAFE anyway, so, and we're happy to do whatever members, you know, just to assure you, so happy.
Thank you, Mr. Brecken. Mr. Morgan.
Tiny insignificant typo, but the report keeps on referring to MHCLG, which obviously doesn't exist anymore.
Right, is that all the comments, questions? Anyone else have anything else they want to add on the item? If not, thank you very much to everyone who's presented today and asked questions and answered questions. And thank you to members for attendance. The date of the next meeting of the Commission is scheduled to take place on Wednesday, the 15th of March at 10 a.m. So see you then, and thank you very much.